Welcome to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans. The Pasture, Rangeland, Forage Insurance program offered by the USDA's Risk Management Agency can help mitigate the financial impact of low precipitation or drought on the bottom line for many livestock producers who depend on perennial grass production. For more on how the program works and the upcoming application deadline for 2022 coverage, I'm here with Jay Parsons, professor and farm and ranch management specialist in UNL's Department of Agricultural Economics. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
So you published a new article on our website at cap.unl.edu about what PRF insurance offers. So can you just explain how the coverage works?
Yeah, it's a rainfall index insurance. So it's generally a group plan. Everything's accounted for in grids, and they're a quarter degree longitude by a quarter degree latitude. But at the equator, that's exactly 17 miles, or more or less 17 miles by 17 miles square here, because the curvature is about 12 by 16 miles. So it's a fairly significant area. And NOAA basically collects data on precipitation and has since 1948. And so they use that data to determine what is normal for precip in that grid throughout the year. And then you can insure off of that normal precip level up to 90% of normal precip. And so it goes in 2-month intervals. So, for example, if you insured March, April at 90% normal precip and ended up at 60%, they would take the difference there, which is, say, 30% times your coverage value, and that's the indemnity payment you would get. And the notion behind it is that low precip leads to low forage production, and that's your compensation for it.
And PRF can be an important part of risk management for livestock producers who depend on those perennial grasslands for forage. So what are feed conditions like in Nebraska here as we talk in November 2021? And then how could the insurance play a role next year? Yeah,
well, we've had a fairly dry year, and we had a fairly dry year last year also, so we've had a couple of them in a row. So in general, pastures aren't in great condition as a whole throughout the state. Now, north of us in particular, and on a little bit further west over to Montana, they're in really bad shape. They're in horrible shape. So we're not near as bad as they are, but still it's been extremely dry and people are running short of forage. And so some of the things that USDA has done recently, for example, is open up CRP for grazing and things like that. And that's usually indicative of just not very good pasture conditions. These things run in cycles. You got to insure on a calendar year. So we don't know what next year is going to be like, but we certainly know that we've had a couple of stressful years this year. And if next year is short of rainfall, that obviously is going to have a negative impact on people's forage production.
And your article includes a great sample scenario of PRF coverage in action. So can you just walk through a simple example for listeners here of how the coverage works in practice?
Yeah. So in the article, I just picked a sample grid, and it was basically for broken bow with that. It doesn't really matter. You can pick one throughout anywhere in the state, essentially. And if you go to RMA's website, they have a nice little tool that you can use Google Maps and find your pasture and see which grid you're in and see some of the history. But this particular example, the big deal was it was super dry in May and June for this particular grid. So they got about a $3,000 indemnity coming back for the number of acres that I had in there, which is right at 1,000 acres. But anyway, that pretty much covered their premium for the year. And so there's still a couple of periods yet for the data to come in. Obviously, November, December, we don't know what it is yet. But even the other 2 months prior to that, the September, October ones, they haven't reported the data yet on that either. So there's still some indemnities to be determined. And at this point, that particular grid and the sample coverage that it put in, it's already covered the premium and then some. So they've got some indemnity back in the positive there. And the way the insurance works is you take it out for the calendar year, but you don't actually have to pay the premium until I think it's in September before it's due. And that's only if the indemnity or the premium at that point exceeds the indemnity you've gotten so far. They take it out of the indemnity until the premium is paid, and then you get the extra.
And do you have an idea of how widely utilized PRF insurance has been recently in Nebraska?
So when it first became rainfall insurance back in 2014, there was a little over 3 million acres insured in the state. But since then, it's dropped steadily down, more like 1.5, 2 million acres. But this last year for 2021, after the dry year in 2020, it bumped all the way up to 3.55 million. So pretty significant increase on it. It is subsidized. 51 to 59% of the premium is covered by the government, but it's been that way forever. So that's not really the reason behind it. People were just worried about dry weather and went after the insurance as a hedge to cover against that.
And I know this year there's been a change in the sign-up deadline for the coverage, right? So people, if they're listening here in November, they still have some time.
Yeah, the sign-up deadline has been moved to December 1st. So they have a couple more weeks. For the last several years, today would be the sign-up deadline, November 15th. I shouldn't say that.
That's okay.
Okay. For the last several years, November 15th was the deadline. So they extended that a little bit. That was just out of request from people. They had a review of it last fall and asked for comments, and that was one of the things that they've agreed on and implemented already. So that's nice. It gives producers a couple more weeks and through Thanksgiving to think through what they want to do for the coming year.
And last thing, if you're out on the road doing an extension meeting, what's your message to producers considering PRF insurance?
Well, I always tell people with all of these government insurance, whether it's PRF or some other crop insurance thing, is pay attention to the subsidies that are attached to it to incentivize you to use it. Make your own decision on whether you need to get it or not, taking that into account of what it'll actually cost you net. And then and look at your overall risk management plan. Like with anything, when you take out risk management coverage, it costs you a little bit, but these insurance programs, especially with that 50 to 59% premium subsidy, tends to pay for itself over the long haul. So some years you might go 2 or 3 years where you just pay premiums and you'll get a lot back in indemnities, depending on how you have your coverage set up. But in the long run, it'll pay for itself because of the heavily subsidized nature of it. And they're not, nobody's trying to mess with you. Nobody's trying to, make a bunch of money off you. The government basically is helping incentivize that so that producers come out at least breaking even on it and covering their, covering the risk and taking care of things. One last thing on that is always tell people don't try to outguess Mother Nature. And so if they are interested in PRF, take some time to look at it, decide how to implement it, and then stick with the implementation. Because the most frustrating thing is if you take it out 1 year and don't get paid, then decide the next year you're not going to take it out, and it ends up being a dry year, and that's the year that the payment would come in. You get extremely frustrated with just trying to outguess whether it's going to rain or when it's going to rain and all that kind of stuff. So come up with a plan and just stick with it and make it a part of your overall operation.
Perfect. We've been talking about the Pasture Rangeland Forage Insurance Program offered by USDA's Risk Management Agency. Again, the sign-up deadline this year is December 1st, and you can speak with your crop insurance agent before then to enroll in the program. And for much more on this, you can read Dr. Parsons' new article he's published on our Center for Ag Profitability's website at cap.unl.edu. Jay, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ryan.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.